Hi, I'm Matt Webb. Did you know in the states of North Carolina and South Carolina, whenever you talk to a real estate agent about your motivation to buy a house or sell a house, your finances, your time frame, any vulnerabilities you may have, concern about schools, anything that is important to you, did you know that as agents we're required to report that information back to the listing agent in a particular property transaction, unless we are hired as a buyer's agent? It's true. Okay, let's discuss agency disclosure. Customers and clients. Quite simply, we all begin as customers when we are approaching a real estate company or a real estate agent. In some cases, it may progress and there may be a relationship that turns into a company and client relationship. And I'll discuss the difference here in a second. First off, here are the players. It begins with the real estate company, and in my case, it's Keller Williams at Fort Mill. I am a licensee, one of many licensees who work under the policies of Keller Williams at Fort Mill. A person on the street phoning the company, asking about a listing, someone stopping in, just wants to ask a few questions, they will be treated as a customer, and they'll be treated fairly and honestly and with accurate information. If a person needs particular services like listing a home or buying a home, looking at other investor type services, that person will most likely become a client. Let's start with the duties owed by law to a customer. Well, in the event there are any offers, the customer is owed that in a timely manner. Their money should be accounted for properly. They should have a full explanation of the scope of services, be treated fairly, honestly, and with accurate information. And very importantly, they should be made aware of any adverse material facts. Material facts are things that are a safety impact. An example would be a property that they're looking at may have lead-based poisoning, lead-based paint poisoning. It may have radon gas. There may be something that would stop the transaction from going through. Generally speaking, the big items are material facts, and they are owed to you whether you are a client or a customer on either side of the bargaining table. What about a client? Well, first off, how does a customer become a client? Typically, it follows something like this. Someone reaches out to me and says, Matt, I'd like to look at properties. I'm interested in this particular area, this school district, this price range, and all that. And I've had this discussion with them, like as I'm having with you now on the video, explaining their rights and my duties as an agent. First off, before we get into ability to pay or pre-qualification, time frame, any pressures on that buyer or on the seller to buy or sell a property, I advise them that they have the right not to share that information with me unless we're in a client relationship. So what is that client relationship? Well, first of all, the client relationship is characterized as being a team and sharing information and having confidentiality between us. So what it means is that if you share something with me and I represent you and you are my client, I'm on your team. I'm looking out for your best interests, not the interests of the person on the opposite side of a potential transaction. It could be summarized by obedience. If you ask me to do something, if it's in the scope of the law, I'm honor bound to do that. I'm loyal to your interests, even to the expense of someone else's interests. Ethically, I want you to get the best deal, to get what you want in the transaction. Full disclosure and confidentiality. You don't necessarily get full disclosure and you do not get confidentiality if you're working with an agent who is merely treating you as a customer. An example would be if you approached a seller of a house, the selling agent, and you were unrepresented. You would not be privy to confidential information. You would not get full disclosure except for the big items, the material facts. And in all cases, you should be treated with reasonable care and skill. The difference between a customer and a client, if you're confused at this point, is that it's in writing and it's a relationship based upon being loyal to your best interests. In some cases, especially with large real estate companies, and Keller Williams is certainly a large real estate company, there may be a situation where I'm showing property to, let's say, you, and you are my client. but I also hold a listing to a particular house. We may have looked at 2 houses that day that were listed by an outside agent from a different company. On the 3rd listing, we go to the house and it just seems to be perfect. It fills all the squares. But I'm in the position where, as a licensee, I have both the listing side, the seller, and the buyer side. In that case, and only with your permission, I would represent you as a dual agent. And now the dual agent has certain limitations. We talked about confidentiality. We talked about full disclosure. Well, especially when it comes to confidentiality and motivating factors, I'm not able to pass that information between the buyer side and the seller side. I'm really a fair arbiter of the transaction. There's some conveniences because you're dealing with one agent as far as making offers, accepting offers, but you're not getting the strategy, the advisement to the full extent that you would get if we were exclusively just a buyer's agent or just a listing agent. But there's hope. There's a remedy for that. At Keller Williams and other companies, we are permitted by the state to offer designated agency, sometimes referred to as dual designated agency. And that is really characterized by offering you full services. And that's accomplished when the broker in charge at the company appoints another licensee to take over the role of either the seller or the buyer. And now that person is advising and maintaining confidentiality between their party and vice versa. So it's almost like a transaction you have between 2 different real estate companies, one representing a buyer and seller, but ultimately they're under the umbrella of the real estate company. Now the real estate company stays objective and does not get into confidentiality. That's held between the buyer and their licensee and the seller and their licensee. So it can be a little confusing, but when you hear the word designated, just think of that person being designated to represent you. Regardless of any one of these agency agreements, you should be asking yourself some of these questions. Here are some examples. Can I work with other companies during the time of the agreement? Now, under Keller Williams policies, that is not the case. Keller Williams offers exclusive buyer agency, exclusive representation for listings, with the exceptions that I just talked about with dual agency and designated dual agency. So the short answer to that is no, not during the terms of the agreement. What will happen if I buy or sell on my own without the agent? That's a good one. A lot of people think, well, I can use the agent to go look at property or gain access, but then I can just contact the other party myself, and whether it's intentional or not, and work directly with the property owner or the buyer. Regardless, if that were to happen, the agent who has done the work, the marketing, or has affected the sale on either side is owed their commission. And let's talk about commission. 90% of the time or more, the agents will collect the commission from the listing side. The listing agreement specifies what the listing agent will charge and what their firm will get. The buyer's agents and their firms are typically paid out of that listing percentage. So more often than not, when you're a buyer, you're not actually paying for the services of your realtor, let's say. But you need to know that if you go to an unrepresented property owner, or you really want that house that is not being marketed by a listing agent, or let's say it's a for sale by owner or something along those lines, you may be on the hook for paying your buyer's agent for their time and their work to affect that sale as well. How will the company be paid for its services? I covered that. Does the company represent both buyers and sellers as clients? Again, Keller Williams and other companies practice designated dual agency. Other companies may not. So you'd want to have this discussion. So remember, it's your choice. You can be unrepresented, which means you're treated by a customer from either the buyer or seller or both sides of the transaction. You can hire our company, and if so, we'll do that through a written agreement, which is required by law. And if you decide to go forward under shared services, I explained in those earlier charts about the dual agency or designated agency or you can remain as a single agent relationship. Now remember, the designated agency is a full service where you have your own broker, your own licensee to represent your best interests and to maintain your confidentiality. I know that can be confusing. So that's a high view of the agency relationships. I'm required to explain these by the state, and I'll be happy to revisit any of this information and provide you more information about what agents do, both in North Carolina and South Carolina, on your behalf. Thank you.